Hi, this is Chris Brown, co-author of this Kendall Adobe Animate CC HTML5 framework, and this is a short little video to go through some of the publishing options. So first off, I'll just step through the FLA file very quickly. On the main timeline, we have a lightbox layer that just holds a simple movie clip with some graphics that are opened up in a lightbox style inside of one of the examples. We have a menu movie clip, similarly, that holds all of the menu items. We have a header layer that just holds some graphics that are there the whole time. We have a background layer that's similar. And then we have the pages layer. We go inside of that timeline, and this is where all of the examples live. So we have 17 different examples of functionality, and each one holds everything inside of a movie clip. So if I go inside of one of these, double click, now I can go in and check out the code and check out the example to make each one of these happen. So in order to publish, we have some default publish settings that we're going to get into more detail in a moment here. But first off, I'm just going to publish with the default settings just by hitting Command Return, and that will publish all the files and automatically open the app inside of your default browser. So here we have the framework that is nicely centered on the screen. It actually also is responsive, the way it'll scale down both horizontally and vertically. From here I can go ahead and use the back and next arrows to go through all of the different examples, or I can use the menu to jump directly to things if I like. Now let's take a quick look at the files in the Finder that this is actually generating for us. So just publishing does quite a bit of things. If I go back into my Finder, this is my project folder. So I'm just going to step through very quickly what each of these files and folders do. Now some of these are put here manually, however many of them are automatically generated by the publishing process. So this components folder is auto-generated from these different form components that are used inside of one of these examples. This email PHP file is manually put there, used in one of the examples to actually send an email from a server from the form. This images folder is auto-generated and pulls all of the images from the published app into this separated images folder. Our FLA folder, which is our editing folder that we actually open in Animate, it automatically generates an HTML file to hold all of the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that it generates to actually open in a browser. I'll open this up and look at the code a little closer soon. Then it also auto-generates this JavaScript file, which basically takes all the information that we set up in the timeline, the interface, and creates a JavaScript representation of it to run it all in HTML5. We have our recover file because it's currently open and working. We have our sounds file, which is auto-generated to pull all the audio clips in and link to from the HTML file. This source file is manually put here because when we add a video and a poster for the video to show before the video loads, actually needs to be in a separate spot than this videos folder, which actually pulls a copy of the video from the source and automatically places it into the videos folder for the live running application. Now, it's a little funky that you can't just use this one in the videos folder as the source, or it will automatically disappear. You have to actually have a separate source video, and then Animate will copy it and generate it into the place that it wants for the HTML published. And then finally, we have this template HTML, which is the template that the published file, this HTML file, bases itself on. So we can add a couple of little things in here, which I've done, that I'll show you in a moment. So let's go back into Animate, and let's start by going into the publish settings and just taking a look at what our basic options are. Okay, so with HTML5 Canvas, you should see something like this where we have JavaScript HTML checked, and in the basic settings, the output name of the HTML and JavaScript, we can just leave that default as the name of the project. Looping timeline, including hidden layers, those are just basic options we can leave checked. We're really starting to get into things is with this centering and making responsive. So I'm going to start by unchecking both of these and show you how this works. So if I uncheck both of these and then hit publish, which is the same thing as hitting command return, but since I've already done that, opened a version of my browser, now I can just hit publish, go back to my browser and hit refresh and see the difference. So by default, it just tries to stick it up in the upper left corner, and we don't have any kind of responsiveness. So as the window or the device size gets smaller, it will just scroll to be able to see the whole thing. Now, based on your application, there may be different reasons that you'd want to keep a static size in a specific spot on the page or make it responsive. There's a lot of different use cases, so we have a lot of options to do this. So going back here, let's go ahead and take center stage, but let's just center it horizontally and publish. You can go back and refresh, and now it's nicely locked to the top, but horizontally locked. If I try the vertical method, now it stays locked. Oops. There we go. I hit command return again instead of publish, which opened a new instance. So now it stays locked to the left, but now it is vertically centered. Okay. Now what we want is the best of both worlds, where we're going to go ahead and say both, which is how I had the initial default set. When we hit publish on both, refresh, now we'll nicely center in both of them. Now again, it's still just scrolling when it gets past the bounds rather than scaling it down. So that's what making responsive does. If we click make responsive, we can choose either just by width or by height, but I'm just going to go ahead and put both on here, publish it. This is the way we originally had it in the default settings. When I refresh this, now when I make the browser window smaller, I can see that it actually scales the app down both vertically and horizontally as it needs to stay fitting inside of the screen, which is really nice. So then we have the scale to fit visible area. This is an interesting one because whether we choose fit in view or stretch to fit is typically not used because that has the option to actually stretch the aspect ratio of the app and make things look squished or stretched or whatnot just to fit it inside of the browser window. Fit in view is a little closer to what may be useful in some use cases. However, it can cut some things off. I'll show you the difference here. So if I publish with scale to fit and fit in view, now it's never going to scale and stretch things so they lose their aspect ratio and look awkward. However, it does its best to fill the entire browser screen. So there's a little bit of letterboxing up top here. But as I stretch things around, you can see that it does its best to fill in the actual page regardless of how large it is, which is nice. And it'll just letterbox around it. So depending on if you have a lot of vector graphics or you just want to fill the stage up as much as you can, that's a nice option. And then if I change it to stretch to fit, this might be a little awkward for our example, but what this does is actually fill the entire page with no letterboxing. So at this page, at this size, it looks okay, but as I get a little smaller, notice how it actually cuts things off. All right, so it will fill the entire thing regardless of whether, there's no letterboxing or anything, but it'll just scale and stretch. And it looks like it does not actually change the aspect ratio, but it will do is cut things off a little bit. So it could be useful if it was more of a just decorative piece or something like that. But for something that has actual important content in it, you may want to stay away from being able to cut it off like that. So I'm going to go back to setting this just to not scale to fit at all. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it center stage and make responsive. I'm going to publish this again to take a quick look. Make sure it's back to the way we expect. There we go. Okay, that's the way we want for this one. So that's how you can just kind of dock it around in different areas and make it scalable or make it fill in. There's a lot of options within these to play with and kind of publish within the HTML page the way that you would like. Now the next one down is you can create a preloader. By default, I'm just using the one it comes with. I can click preview and it will open up and show me my little animated GIF. Now you can actually create your own. If I go back and look at the Finder inside of the images, this will actually generate this preloader.gif, starts with an underscore here. What you can do is instead of the default, you can go ahead and choose browse and then just go find, if you do a quick Google search for animated GIFs or preloader GIFs, you can find just a ton of very low image size preloader GIFs that you could then just go ahead and load one on your computer and it will generate it. Now, similar to what I mentioned for the video, you will have to have that inside of the source file. If you tried to just put it inside the images file, load it the same, and give it the same name and tell it this is your preloader, same kind of issue is going to happen where Animate's going to try and recreate it, but it'll end up just making it disappear. So you'll need to put inside of your source folder your new preloader graphic, whatever that may be called, link to it here, and then once you've linked to it, then when you publish, Animate will automatically add a copy of it into your images folder. So that's a pretty cool option, and you can't see it that well when I'm just local here, but when this is actually put online, you saw it for a split second. However long it takes your project to load, could be a couple of megabytes depending on how many images, and you're not really sure if your end user is just on a regular Wi-Fi or if they're on a slower cell network. But having a little preloader there is really helpful to actually show the end user that content is indeed coming. Okay, so again, I'm just leaving the default. It's nice to have something. These image folders, these are fine just to leave the default. If for some reason you ever needed to change, but that's not usually the case, to change what name of the folder, the images, the sounds, and then even some of these create.js assets. This create.js is actually the JavaScript library that Adobe Animate CC uses to transform everything into HTML5 and JavaScript. Now we're going to come back to this little check mark combine into sprite sheets in a moment when we get over to the sprite sheet tab, and I'll explain a little bit of how that works. So mainly on this first page, the only thing you really have to play with is where you want it set on the page, whether it should be responsive or not, and the whole scaling and whatnot.